Okay, welcome to this really exciting session today where we are hearing from Mr. Victor Mugambi, who is a legal researcher from Kenya. And he also is a member of the Future Law Collaborative and working on developing a Future Law Kenyan hub. And Mr. Mugambi has been really instrumental in developing the COVID-19 policy database for Kenya, mapping all of those policies that took place during COVID-19, and has incredible insights there. And today, Victor is going to be sharing with us on the advanced technology, progressive trade, and historical pandemic trends in the African continent. So welcome, Victor, and welcome all who are here joining us and those who will be watching the replays and on the website. Welcome. Feel free to be writing, feel free to be writing your questions in the chat, and we will take the questions at the end. Welcome, Victor.
Thank you very much, Margaret. If I'll be able to share my screen right now, I'll do so that we can get on with the presentation. Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity. As rightly introduced by Margaret, my name is Victor Mugambi. I am currently a student at the Kenya School of Law undertaking the Advocates Training Program. And I thought that it would be prudent for me to discuss in the African context, advanced technology, progressive trade, and historical pandemics in Africa. And the reason why I wanted to bring this topic was because I wanted to share the transitional journey that Africa has had through going through past pandemics up to this recent pandemics, and how those transitional stages have been in the African context. So I'll be focusing on a few African countries. My research did not go broadly to all African countries. So to start off, I'll go to the next slide, discussing the first pandemic which occurred in Africa and which was very paramount in the African setting, was the HIV tuberculosis co-infection. And millions of Africans are actually infected with HIV, and it has caused serious illnesses and deaths that have come together with it. And the HIV tuberculosis co-infections are actually related very closely, and tuberculosis can actually be termed as increasingly attributable to immigration. We can see that in 2003, it was actually estimated that 8.8 million people in Africa have cases of tuberculosis, and that resulted in 1.7 million deaths generally in Africa. 38% of tuberculosis patients have HIV in Africa. So HIV is prevalent in tuberculosis patients, and the World Health Organization in the African region recorded the rates to actually be that 38% of TB patients have HIV in Africa. So tuberculosis is actually the first manifestation of HIV, of the HIV virus. And we can see that the largest population globally that has the highest HIV population is in South Africa. And these statistics are very recent. We can see that 7.5 million people in South Africa have the HIV virus, and 300,000 are infected with tuberculosis. And to bring this forward, I would like to share a particular graph which shows that most of the African countries in the Southern Hemisphere have high prevalence of HIV, and mainly between the ages of 15 to 49. And we can see that at the bottom of the screen right here, the East African countries of Uganda and Kenya also show significant high rates of HIV prevalence in those countries. So this is the first pandemic that actually caused Africa to have a downfall, and throughout the years, they're still trying to find a cure, but of course there are those antiretroviral treatments that are being used to suppress the effects of HIV. When we move on to the next slide, we can see that the focus is still on South Africa, having the largest HIV population, but also the coronavirus cases in South Africa are very high. And we can see that the division of provinces actually shows that these particular places also have high HIV rates. For example, you can see the Western Cape just down here has 44,143 cases of coronavirus, but these are the statistics that were collected at around the month of August. But we can also see the HIV rates are very high in these particular provinces, ranging from between 17% to 22%. And scientists have actually not found the correlation between coronavirus and HIV. So that is still an ongoing research, but I think this particular graph really brings out the illustration on how HIV and coronavirus are affecting Africa in general. The next pandemic, which we all know, is the Ebola virus. And most people actually don't know that the Ebola virus actually first appeared in Africa in 1972 in two simultaneous outbreaks. The first outbreak was in South Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And actually at the DRC, there's a river called the Ebola River, which many scientists have concluded that this is where the Ebola virus actually occurred from. Now, later on in the years, the most impactful outbreak that actually occurred was in West Africa, in the countries of Guinea and Sierra Leone and Liberia. And this was around 2014 and 2016. And the virus actually started in Guinea, and due to the lack of closure of borders, it the virus traveled from Guinea to Sierra Leone and to Liberia. So we can see that those are the particular effects that the lack of measures being taken caused the virus to actually spread from one country to another. But however, scientists and medical institutions came up with an experimental vaccine that is called the RVSV, ZEBOV vaccine, which proved to actually be very protective against the virus. And the scientists actually did a test on about 5,000 patients using this vaccine, and it actually suppressed the Ebola virus very effectively. And when they did this particular test, the virus did not show again for the next 10 days. So they continued using this particular vaccine to suppress the spread of the Ebola virus. Of course, now currently we have the COVID-19 pandemic, which is present in the African setting. However, the African Union members have actually concluded that this particular virus is actually going undetected in Africa. And this is due to the lack of proper testing kits and the lack of effective technology to trace this particular virus. And we can see that scientist Professor Mark Wilhove has actually said that roughly 91% of coronavirus infections in Africa are among people under the age of 60. But the manifestation of this particular virus is only asymptomatic to 80% of the cases, or they appear merely mild. And this is far higher than anywhere else in the world. So this is a particular issue or a fact that has really perplexed scientists on why this particular virus is different in Africa than it is in other places around the world. So we will now look at how the role of technology in battling these viruses over the years. We can see that in the 1980s and the 1990s, Africans were actually very reluctant to take the HIV test, mainly because there was a lack of confidentiality. on this virus, or there was a lack of confidentiality of the information that they would give and receive from various institutions regarding the testing and the outcomes, and mainly because there was a lack of technology, and the process was mainly paper-based, and it was hard for institutions to actually keep records of who has the virus, and the lack of confidentiality actually made people reluctant in the sense that targeted persons felt that their information would be disclosed to others, so they didn't take the test, and this actually made the virus spread even more because people did not know their status. But with the introduction of mobile phones, and in the 21st century recently, we find that the mobile phones have enabled persons to have referral treatment and prescriptions through mobile phones. So the mobile phone has played a huge role in actually suppressing the spread of this virus, because now people have easy access to information, and there's a high trust and confidentiality. And so among these networks, there's a higher accountability to those who are doing the testing. And again, there's a confidentiality for those who are doing the testing, and a confidentiality to those who are actually receiving the test. So we can see the Ebola virus reoccurred in 2014, as earlier stated. And this was during the age of advanced technology. But however, in Africa, we were still transitioning from the paper-based recordings to now the digitization of contact tracing systems. And an example of a good contact tracing system I will discuss when I come to speak about the coronavirus currently. And I'll give examples of different applications that have been used in order to trace the coronavirus. But for example, a country like Nigeria, the Ministry of Health in Nigeria had actually controlled. They found effective ways of controlling the spread of Ebola by using the experimental vaccine, and also by successfully detaining their patients in the wards. And this actually suppressed the spread of Ebola, and eventually sort of calmed it down. So this is the role of technology in tackling pandemics in Africa. So the Ministry of Health in Kenya has actually introduced a particular mobile application, which is available in Google Play Store. And it actually for example, if someone travels from abroad and comes to Kenya, they can actually use this app to answer certain questions about symptoms that they've had. And this helps the government do very effective, or conduct very effective contact tracing. There are also various ways in which technology has actually suppressed the spread of coronavirus in Kenya. We can see even in the legal practice, the Law Society of Kenya has embraced the digitization of legal practice and provision of legal services throughout the country. And so this has really controlled the aspect of having gatherings and social distancing and such like things. So having the litigation, the online litigation being conducted online is very effective. And this goes coherently with the new provisions of the Civil Procedure Act, which actually allows advocates to serve documents or serve summons through online platforms. And this has actually aided in the suppression of COVID-19. If we look at the educational sector, many institutions have embraced, as we all know, they have embraced the online platforms to conduct learning. And a good example of an independent application that has been introduced this year by the Mobile Educational Games Group is the game called HIPS Africa, which HIPS Africa is an acronym of hiding in plain sight Africa. And I like this particular acronym because it shows the potential that Africa has to progress in terms of technology. Africa has a lot of potential, but it's merely hiding in plain sight. It's not exploring its potential to the maximum. So this is an example of dispensation or rather dissemination of knowledge through a mobile application game. So we can see that the mobile educational games group has made this particular game, made in Kenya by Africans, for the entire world. So this particular game was played. It was installed on Google Play Store by people from various parts of the country. And during the lockdown phase, they actually just made themselves busy by playing this particular game on their mobile phones. And and the game played a role in not having people outside the house. So, and it's actually a very effective game because it promotes education and also knowledge on Africa's collective union, because the game is based on the African geography, African flags, countries, and capitals, and capital cities. So this is a game that increases your knowledge on Africa, and it was a good initiative by this particular game company. So we can see, still in the discussion of education, we can see the statistics in the month of June in Cape Town, South Africa, found that 98 teachers and over 1,800 pupils were actually tested positive for coronavirus across 20 schools in the Western Province. So this is the need. This is where we see the need of having such mobile applications being innovated by African young minds in order to fight such outcomes. If we go to the next slide, we can see that the stay-home requirement on a global basis saw that certain African countries, as you can see here, this is below Kenya, this is Tanzania. We can see that Tanzania actually took no measures at all in the month of June 17th, 2020, to have strict stay-home requirements, and that was actually detrimental to them. We can also see certain countries here. I think this is Zimbabwe, I think, and this is Mozambique right here. Mozambique actually recommended that the stay-home requirement is very vital in fighting this virus. So Kenya also required the stay-at-home requirement to be effected in the nation. But however, there were a few exceptions where people could actually go out when it's essentially necessary to do so. So that's just a measure to show you the outline of the data across the globe. If we go to the next slide, still on the topic of education, that the schools were closed during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we can see that certain countries here, even in West Africa, took no measures during this pandemic to close schools during this period of time. But we can see a country like Kenya required that all levels of schools should actually be closed, from the primary levels to the secondary levels, even to the tertiary levels, in which even in the advocates training program, we're still conducting our advocates training at home. So this is the data that shows you how the school closing requirement was around Africa. And you can see even globally, the statistics are very, very clear. And we can see a country like Australia actually did not take any measures at all to close their schools. Moving on to the next slide, another issue in Africa and globally has been the employment issue, the closure of workspaces. And what I found out is there were certain loopholes in the employment and labor relations institutions and the legal instruments that govern labor relations in the world. They did not actually include provisions that anticipated such a virus. And therefore you saw a lot of people globally losing their jobs and actually not being able to provide for their families. And so the role of technology has actually aided some countries to benefit from, or the certain citizens in certain countries to benefit from working from home through the use of technology. So I want to now talk about the impact of these pandemics on African trade. Now, when the HIV tuberculosis virus came in the African setting, it had an adverse impact on the movement of goods, services, and people in the 1990s and the early 2000s. And actually, some Western countries actually sanctioned or imposed sanctions from countries which were highly hosting populations that are highly affected with HIV from coming into their own countries. So this had an adverse impact on trade. We can also see that there was high infant mortality rates from persons in the age brackets of 0 to 5. We also had girls that are infected at the ages of 15 and 25 in Africa. And the main cause of this is early sexual intercourse was one of the elements that made girls infected at early ages. Also early marriages. This is a customary African practice to have early marriages. And this was one of the reasons why we saw that young girls were actually affected by HIV. The productive generation in Africa normally ranges from ages 35 to 55. And this particular age group contracted the HIV tuberculosis co-infections. And really, the age group was so much affected that they could no longer be productive to the realization of economical progress in African countries. And of course, we had the vulnerable society aging from 60 years and above who tested positive, and you know, they're very vulnerable and they couldn't get so much help because of the lack of developing certain vaccines or medicine that would control the HIV virus. So also the Ebola virus had an adverse impact on Africa, and especially West Africa. And this led to the closure of borders. And the United States also imposed sanctions on certain West African countries that had actually were affected by the Ebola virus. And now I want to talk about the scientific and medical research institutions in West Africa. They really put the effort to find a way to suppress the Ebola virus in Africa. But however, those institutions were poorly funded. And we can see that the lack of funding comes from external forces such as corruption, misappropriation of funds, and such vices in the African setting. So as I spoke about earlier, the Ministry of Health in Lagos, Nigeria, had successfully controlled the virus by merely detaining the patients and finding effective ways of disposing of bodies that were actually affected by the virus. Another point is that the African countries lacked help from outside, from Western countries, because this was now viewed as a political question, that the Ebola virus is actually an African problem, and it's not a problem that affects the rest of the world. So having this political notion of eradicating Ebola virus really affected Africa, or West Africa, detrimentally. And we can see that the trade and procurement services were heavily affected because of the closure of borders. And and this is the reason why the African trade was heavily affected. So that is the impact of pandemics on African trade. This is a graph that shows that, okay, South Africa's healthcare system is indeed among the best in the world. As we can see from this graph, we have the average cost in terms of US dollars, the average cost of accessing medicine or accessing medical help in South Africa, of course, is $1,121 per head. So we can see that other African countries here, such as Botswana, it's $851 per head. Here in Namibia, it's $749 per head. And here in Angola, it's $355 per head. So this is the average healthcare per head. And we can see Lesotho as well, Zambia, Tanzania is an East African country. That's $136 per head. But statistics from the year 2017 has actually showed that Kenya spends 77 US dollars on healthcare per head, and Nigeria spends about 74 US dollars per head. But these are statistics from 2014. So we can see that South Africa having the best healthcare system in Africa, but still having the most viruses is very perplexing still. But still having the highest rates of these viruses is very perplexing. But of course, there are those social elements that lead to the increase of the spread of certain viruses. So these are the multi-dimensional economies in Africa that are currently having among the best healthcare systems due to progressive technology. So we can see that the impact of pandemics on trade, still on that subject, the coronavirus has affected many African nations. And of course, the nations had to take measures to actually impose restrictions on transboundary trade. And we can see that most African countries actually rely on tourism, the exportation of horticulture, floriculture, and agricultural products to external places. And these stronghold sectors have been heavily affected. Of course, there have been complex clearance procedures at the borders, slowing down trade. We have the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which was not actually implemented very well during this time of crisis. And that actually affected the movement of trade. We can see that the African Continental Free Trade Area has actually placed heavy tariffs and heavy taxes on trade, therefore making it a very problematic job for countries to actually carry on trade successfully. So another statistic is that 13.8 million people are living below the food poverty line in South Africa, and farmers are struggling to create farming for subsistence and commercial purposes, and 50% of South African households are actually struggling to meet their basic needs. And so that is some of the things I wanted to bring up on the impact of trade in Africa with these viruses. So in conclusion, these are the points I want to recommend and negotiate. Negotiating the new normal. That is in fact the theme of this entire summit. And some of the ideas I had was in fact the full implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. It not being used to its maximum potential is not bringing any fruition to trade in Africa. So therefore they must dismantle the tariffs to ease in the process of trade for African countries. And there also needs to be controlled surveillance on trade in the borders, because we find out that even Margaret can attest to this, that we argued in our paper on international trade and procurement during times of crisis. We found out that there were stringent measures in administrative borders and stringent measures on controlling and having surveillance imposed on trade during times of crisis when we needed personal protective equipment from abroad. for it to be passed through the borders in good time, because these are emergency times. We found out that the heavy control on trade on the borders actually affected the reception of medical equipment in Kenya, or in parts of Africa. I also had the idea of adding health workers at the borders. These are some of the ideas that have also been argued in other papers from the World Health Organization, and other African scholars have argued that health workers should actually be at the border points to ensure the safety of products and have the safe testing of these products before they come into the country. And that will ease in the process of trade. We also had the idea of empowering local producers to fill in the gaps of imports. So when there's a virus, you need to empower the local farmers, the local agriculturalists, to actually to produce food during, and support them with money, of course, to produce food during times of crisis, so that we don't have to rely on imports. Also, lessening African dependency exactly goes with this point on external countries, and seeking closer alternative markets. For example, you find it's very, very expensive to have aircraft transitions from Africa to other parts of the world. It's very expensive, but a country that has been able to sustain this expense, surprisingly, is Rwanda, is doing very well. And but for other African countries, lessening the expense on aircraft transition would effectively lessen the African dependency on external countries for food. We also need to embrace now the use of technology, electronic transactions for trade, and also learning, education, and such things. So online transactions and sourcing external products on using online platforms. So these are the points I really wanted to negotiate, and I hope this presentation has been informative, at least about the African transition from past pandemics to present pandemics, and how we can actually tackle future pandemics. And so those are the points I wanted to negotiate.
Thanks so much,
and I
Victor.
bring you now to the discussion. Thank you, Margaret.
Yeah, thanks so much. Unfortunately, we won't have time for a Q&A. But these documents are available. But what I would invite you, Victor, I think you're coming a little later for the roundtable on just transitions. But if not, I'll invite you to that if you're around. And then we can discuss some of the stuff that you've raised here, because I certainly want to look at the policy gaps and regulatory gaps, and whether other countries could learn from how the African continent handled the Ebola virus. And yeah, so thanks so much, Victor. We've got to rush to another session. It was incredible. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for all those who are here. Bye.